All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We have two really good speakers tonight, so we'll go ahead and get started with that. So first off, thanks for everyone coming out. We had a really good showing for our first meeting and clearly a great one for the second one, so glad we didn't scare anyone off. Tonight, we're going over our billing pillar. So that's just our generalized topic. We're recording it right now, so we'll put it on YouTube if you want to watch this after or tell your friends who are unable to make it. Our first speaker tonight we have is Seth Carr here, and he's going to talk briefly about the real estate. So he basically represents buyers and sellers. When you're going in to purchase a practice or buy into a practice, you can not only buy the patient base, but also buy the real estate. So we're going to go ahead and start with him and then keep it going.
Hey everybody, happy to be back. I think this is my third or fourth year speaking to you all. One of my favorite things to do every year is come speaking to students. As Noah said, my name is Seth William, Carr Realty. I'm a dental real estate broker. I've been in dental for almost 10 years. I've actually sold anything you can think of, probably from CAD/CAM to cone beam to sensors to software, all the way down to supplies. So I have a really good feel for your industry, and that's actually helps me actually in my everyday job in the dental real estate as well. I'm going to jump in pretty quick. Just need the clicker, Noah. I'm going to jump into the content pretty quick. I'm going to keep it as interesting as possible. I'm just going to show two case studies on things that I've actually worked on that could be relevant in the near future after school, and then I'm going to give you an idea of what a startup looks like if you get out of school in a couple of years and want to do a startup as well. Just to give you a little context about who Carr is and why I'm here, it'll really bring some relevancy to why I'm talking to you about dental real estate. But we have two niches. We're a healthcare-specific real estate firm, which is one. Again, due to my background in dental, I mostly worked with dentists on their real estate needs. But the second niche is the one that's most important to you all. So we're a true buyer and tenant-only commercial real estate firm, which means we only represent doctors like yourselves looking to lease or purchase real estate. So we have brokers in 47 states, and it's really odd to think about, but none of us ever list any property. We never have a sign in the window saying, hey, call me, I've listed this property for an owner. So we never represent a landlord or an owner. So we found that most doctors will go and call on property themselves, and they'll be speaking to a listing broker, who in most states can legally represent both parties, you and the landlord, which creates a conflict of interest. And doctors typically don't do very well in the real estate transactions for that reason alone. So when we only represent you in the transaction, we eliminate that conflict of interest, and you typically do better on that real estate transaction because you have exclusive representation. The cherry on top is that our services are 100% free to you. So this is the one commonality to residential real estate, in that if you went and buy a house tomorrow, there's a 6% commission factored into that purchase price or that lease rate. I typically split that 3 and 3 with the listing broker. If that fee is not factored into the lease rate or the purchase price, we'll just do the deal for free for you. I've probably done 10 or 12 deals for free over the last 5 years of doing this. So our fee is typically factored in, but again, if it's not, we'll represent you and do the deal pro bono. So there are various transactions that you all will come across in your career where real estate is a part of that. I'm just going to touch on 3. There's the startup, there's a lease renewal, and then there's a practice transition. So if you go and buy a practice. Just a disclaimer, all of these I'm going to talk about leasing strictly because it's typically very hard for a young doctor to go do a startup and go buy a practice and also buy real estate in that transaction. So you typically are leasing. We can obviously talk about purchasing. Anytime you want to talk about that, that's something that's available to you in the future. So why am I even here talking about real estate? So on average, it's actually the second highest expense in the dental practice. Most people don't think about that. You've got payroll, so you've got to pay your staff. And then you've got your real estate, which is typically 4 to 8% of your overhead. And then you've got your supplies and your lab bill that cover anywhere from 4 to 6% of your overhead. The reason it's not talked about as often is that leases are typically 5 to 10 years long. And they're escalating typically each year as well. But because you only have one opportunity every 5 or 10 years, a lot of times it just kind of goes right over your head and you don't think about it very often. So if there's one thing that you take away from tonight, it is if you're in a lease space, know when your lease ends, and you want to know actually about a year out when it doesn't. Because if you ever want to relocate and go purchase or relocate and add more space, you've got to have the time to do that before you move out of your space. So this is a case study that I worked on. This was a doctor that had been in practice for about 15 years. He'd been in the same space for 15 years, and he'd signed 3 5-year leases. Rent had gone up 10% every year, so it was roughly 30% above when he actually started leasing this space. So he was originally at about 1,800 square feet and was doubling in size and going to almost 3,500 square feet, so he was doing great. Landlord came in and said, hey, you're going to sign a 4th 5-year lease. Rent's going to continue to escalate 10%. You're going to be paying $23.22 per square foot. You can see that's about $6,600 per month. The crazy part about this deal was that the adjacent space that he was taking to double in size was listed at $17 a square foot. So a brand new user could come in and be paying $6 per square foot less than he did, which is crazy. He'd been in here for 15 years, never missed a payment, had been a great tenant for this landlord. So you can see that was about a $1,300 a month difference. I was able to get that down from $23.22 to $18.50. So one other negotiation point that I'm going to touch on is the build-out allowance. So a lot of times, landlords will contribute toward their construction in return for maybe a 5 or 7 or 10-year lease. In this instance, when I got involved, the landlord's contributing nothing toward the doctor's construction. And by the end of the negotiations, he contributed just over $100,000. But this was a 60-month lease. We've lowered the payment $1,300 a month. You can do the math. It's roughly $75,000, and then the landlord contributed just over $100,000 for that construction. And then lastly, there's something else you can negotiate on called the build-out period. Any general contractor you're going to come across, specifically in Kentucky, that's where my experience is, they're going to tell you they need 6 months to build your space out, and that includes permitting. When I got involved, the landlord was giving the doctor 3 months to freshen that original space up and then build out that space next door. So if he'd only had 3 months, he would have been paying for that additional space without being able to see patients, which is not what we're looking for. I was able to get 6. The doctor was able to get his construction done, get his new equipment installed, and he started seeing patients about the same time he was paying rent. So, as you've just seen here, a lot of times, over 5 or 10 years, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake, which you probably wouldn't imagine. But when you all bill $1, you don't keep $1. You're typically running at a 65 to 70% overhead. So a mistake of this magnitude, when you think about it in regard to production, could equal $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. So let's just put this in simple terms. Let's just say your lease ends in 2024 and you're able to save $150,000. Assuming a 65% overhead and a 35% profit margin, that's equivalent to $425,000 worth of production, worth of work that you all have to do. So the whole point here is, if you handle your real estate correctly, just like the instance I talk about, you can do the same amount of work in 2025, but you're actually going to take home more because your overhead's lower. So here's an acquisition sample. So if you all buy a practice and you lease, there's going to be 2 scenarios. There's going to be a lengthy term left. Say it's a 10-year lease and there's 5 years left on the practice you're buying. You're simply going to just assume that lease. Or if you're fortunate enough that there's very little term left, maybe 1 or 2 years, sometimes landlords will allow you to renegotiate a new lease, which would be ideal for you. In this instance, the lease was actually ending when this doctor bought this practice. She was looking at roughly 2,500 square feet, so probably 5 operatories. The landlord said, hey, the previous doctor was going to be paying $30 a square foot, which was well above fair market rent for this area in Kentucky. I was fortunate to negotiate that down to $22 a square foot, which you can see is a $1,600 a month difference. So again, this doctor buying a brand new practice could do the same amount of production that the previous doctor did, but she could take home potentially more than the previous doctor did. Annual escalations is something else that's negotiable. So most landlords want to see the rent go up every year 3 or 4%. I usually try to get it at 2 if possible. It doesn't seem like much, but over 5 or 10 years, it typically is going to amount to tens of thousands of dollars that you're going to pay if it goes up. And then lastly, I was able to get 1 month of free rent here. So the doctor bought the practice, signed a new lease, and then had a month where she was not paying rent before she could see patients, and had 1 month of free rent before she started to see patients. So. And then lastly, we'll kind of look at what a startup will look like and how real estate plays a role in that. So let's just assume you're looking at 6 operatories, so roughly 3,000 square feet. I see dental startups anywhere from $700,000 to $1.1 million, depending on who's financing the project. So let's go right in the middle and assume you're doing a startup, you've been approved for $800,000. So I tell doctors this all the time. I feel like my job is really to help you put a puzzle together. You get approved for a certain amount, and we've got to make that work. And it starts to get difficult when you look at construction costs. So I've been a part of a lot of startups, and ideally I found that construction can be about half of your budget. That leaves you with roughly, in this instance, $400,000. That's going to leave you with roughly $300,000 for equipment, technology, supplies. And you got $100,000 left for working capital. So working capital is part of your budget that is going to be set aside for you to pay your staff, pay your rent, pay your bills while you're getting up and running on that startup. So again, back to the cost to build. If we're looking at 3,000 square feet, it's going to cost you roughly $200 per square foot to build out the inside of your office, which is going to be $600,000, which is well above the $400 I mentioned, which is ideal in my opinion. So all of a sudden, what does our budget look like? We've got $800,000 total, construction $600, equipment and technology and supplies dropped from $300 down to $100, which is very little. And then you still got your $100,000 left of working capital. So we're going to go to that point again that I told you can negotiate on, which is a tenant improvement allowance, where the landlord contributes toward your construction. In return, maybe you sign a 7 or a 10-year lease as opposed to a 5. If we get 50 a square foot, which is what I typically ask for, that's $150,000. Don't always get it, but I do sometimes. All of a sudden, our budget looks like this. We've got $800,000 total. Construction dropped from $600 down to $450, which opens that equipment and technology budget back up to $250, and then we've still got about $100,000 left for working capital. So my job is to really maximize your budget, get you the space that you want, and then also make room for the equipment and technology that you need. If you've been out and added some single unit implants to, your practice, maybe you do some premolar forward endo and cherry pick some of those cases that you really like. You might want to come out and want a cone beam, and you got to make room for those things in your budget, which cone beams can be pretty expensive. So I'm just going to touch on a few other things. I'm almost done here that I've already touched on quite a few of these. The reason I stop here briefly is that a lot of doctors, when I first talk to them, the first thing they think is, I want the cheapest lease rate possible, which in some instances is great. But any dental CPA that you're going to come across is going to say, hey, there's a healthy amount that you want your rent to be, typically at 4 to 8% of what you're going to collect. Again, there's annual escalations that you can negotiate on how much your rent is going up each year. You want at least 6 months on your build-out period if you're leasing a space. Free rent is something that you can ask for as well that I specifically negotiate on for a startup. I love when a startup has 2 or 3 months of free rent to start seeing patients before they actually start paying rent. Then one other thing I was going to mention was exclusivity. If you find a retail center that's highly visible, it's a multi-tenant building, you can ask for the exclusivity for general dentistry or however you want to word it. A lot of landlords will not put another general dentist in their center, but just to protect yourself from competition, you can ask for that exclusivity, and most landlords will give that to you, saying, hey, I'll not lease to a general dentist. So appropriate time frame for projects like this. So a new lease, whether that's a startup, an additional location, or a relocation, you're going to want roughly 9 to 12 months. You've got to go look for space, you've got to negotiate on space, you've got to secure a loan, you've got to work on your layout, you've got to get a construction bid, you've got to get an equipment bid, you've got to develop your floor plan. And then you've got to have roughly 5 or 6 months to build it out once you sign that lease. So there's a lot of work and preparation to get to the point of actually building that space up and signing that lease. And then a practice acquisition, which is going to be most relevant to you all at startup and that acquisition. John can speak to this as well. this varies, but 30 to 90 to 120 days you can get in that practice, depending on how quickly the review goes and if the selling doctor gets you the information that you need on the practice. So in preparation, what can you all do to be prepared to go do an acquisition or go do a startup? Obviously, a lot of you are going to come out of school and go associate. Can you add some endo? Can you add some ortho? Can you add some implants to, how you like to practice? Develop some good practice, some good production history to show a bank, hey, I can support the production this practice is already doing, or I can support the projections that you've got in place to do this startup. Finances. This is just a general rule of thumb. We've got some lenders here. It's kind of bank to bank, but just kind of a few rule of thumbs that I've been given. $800,000 startup or a $600,000 startup. They like to see $60,000 or $80,000 in cash. The more cash you can have on hand, the better. It's not necessary. I've seen people get approved with a lot less cash on hand, but having a little cash on hand is great. Credit score is obviously important to show that you can pay your bills on time. I didn't mention this earlier on. My wife is ironically enough a general dentist, but one thing I would also tell you is to live below your means, early on, so that you can go get approved for that loan in the future. When you go buy that practice or be that startup. I know you're working really, really hard. You get out of school, it's easy to want to go do things. But if you want to get into that practice ownership at some point, just hang on for a couple more years. And then obviously pay your student debt. Not to the point of where maybe you don't have a lot of cash on hand, but continue to pay that debt down again, just to show that, hey, I've got some debt in place and I am paying it down regularly. And then lastly, when you go to a bank or if you go talk to a practice broker, maybe have some business projections in place or a business plan in place showing that you're prepared. I know a lot of practice brokers have told me, doctors call me all the time and say, hey, I'm looking for a practice that's got 6 ops or whatever. Say, hey, I want a modern practice that's producing X amount, because there's this technology in place. If you come to the table looking more prepared, whether it's a lender, whether it's a practice broker, you're gonna have a better chance at getting that project done. And that is all I've got for you. Feel free to ask questions now, reach out to me individually in the future, but I appreciate you all having me, and
good evening, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is John Harris. I'm the managing partner of Fortune Management. Fortune is a full-service practice management company. We're national. We've got about 2,000 practices under management at any given point in time. We only support private practice, not private equity. I am very passionate about private practice, so much so that I'm not only just grateful to be here, be a sponsor of the SDBO, but also be a part of your internal team that's helping this organization expand nationally. My team in the Southeast are actively in the process of helping to build out your infrastructure so that we get even more people a part of this group. I'm incredibly passionate about private practice. We've been around for about 40 years. I've been in the field for about 15. I own multiple franchises here in the Southeast, and our geography is Tennessee and every state that borders Tennessee. And we've got a team of about 10 or 11 coaches scattered out throughout that region that work with private practicing dentists. So I'm going to go way off subject really quick, and then I'm going to come back and come full circle because I don't want Christina to do the whole jerk me off the stage thing. And I apologize in advance because I'm in and out quick this evening. I drove in 3 hours from Knoxville to be here this evening. I've got to turn around and drive 5 hours home. So I'm going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes with you and then I'm out. But I don't want my brief presence to be a reflection of my commitment to this group because I'm absolutely committed to this group. And my personal messages to you is if you drive down the main street here in Lexington, I don't know what this main road is, or I know Nana Ward, that's the road that I know, okay? And New Circle Road, I know New Circle Road. 80% of every medical practice on any street in this city or in any city across North America is, every medical practice is 80% owned by private equity. 20% owned by private practice physicians, and the ones that are owned by private practice physicians are owned by groups of physicians. The reason that is because the medical industry and the healthcare field is the largest bucket of money, and when entrepreneurs have concepts and investment bankers want to invest money to diversify their clients' risks, they go to the biggest bucket of money first. Think about it. 10% market penetration in a $500 billion industry is a little bit different than a 10% market penetration in a $50 billion industry. Everything, technology, lasers, CBCT, 3D printing, every bit of it started in medical and then it worked its way down to dental. So the dental industry is always going to be a few years behind medical. If medical is 80% private equity and 20% private practice, where do you think dentistry's headed? I don't say that to scare you. I say that to hopefully open your eyes and help you realize that the preservation of private practice lies in the hands of the people in this room. Dentistry needs more entrepreneurial dentists, and that's exactly what this group does. This group equips you with the school, the tools and the resources and the information that you need to preserve private practice dentistry. I do not think dentistry is in good hands when it's in the hands of investment banks. I think dentistry is in good hands when it's in the hands of clinicians, and I hope you all agree with that statement. Okay? So in our relationship with our clients, we approach our clients our relationship very similarly to the way that you approach your patients. You approach patient care in the sequence of health first, function second, and aesthetics third. You're probably not going to have a patient present with BOP, bone loss, and mobility, and they're asking for ortho and whitening, and you say, sure, yeah, let's do that. Sounds like a great idea. You're probably going to address the systemic issues first, correct? Okay, the same is true for our company. So when that's going to be really cool, but the slide was going to change right at the right time, and it didn't. So, well, yeah, you want to work on that. So our sequence, the way we approach our practices, is culture first, structure second, and strategy third. All the right people can have the worst systems in the world, no structure, not have the slightest idea what they're doing, but they're still going to make progress. If you've got the wrong people on the bus, the wrong team, poor leadership, poor communication skills, you can have the best systems in the world and you're not going anywhere. So I find too often people tend to focus on systems and strategy and processes and, you know, what's the best way to increase new patients? How do I get more implant cases? How do I hire the right person? And the reality is those things are important, but they're not nearly as important as the people on your team and the people in your practice. And they're not nearly as important as your leadership and communication skills. Okay? Yeah, go ahead and go to the next one. Okay? Very important slide here. There's a big difference between being proactive and reactive. Okay? And I'll use this in a clinical sense so that you better understand the concept here. If you take a clinician, okay, and you go all the way to the left, as far reactive as they can possibly be, I would describe that person as somebody that's probably late career. It might be that 70, 73, 75-year-old dentist that's basically watching decay go through hygiene. It's essentially supervised neglect. They're living on hygiene revenue, not producing a lot of dentistry. It's probably only Crown and Bridge. There's no technology. They might even be, I don't know if paper charts still exist in Kentucky, but if you go to Alabama or Arkansas, aside from some of these folks don't wear gloves, I'm glad you think that's a joke. It is to some extent. But they're very antiquated. Technology-wise, they're very antiquated procedural and systems-wise. If you go all the way to the opposite side of the spectrum, as far proactive as you can possibly go, then you're going to have a dentist that crowns incipient decay on a perfectly healthy 30-year-old with one other restoration in their mouth. Okay? It's not the people, the vast majority of people are going to be within probably 1 or 2 standard deviations of the mean. It's not the people in the middle that pose a real threat. It's the people on the far left and the far right side, okay, the extremists. And there's actually metrics that we use to measure this. This is going to be incredibly important when you look at doing acquisitions and associateships, because if you have a drastically different clinical philosophy than the clinical philosophy of practice that you're going into, that hygiene department is going to have an incredibly difficult time proposing treatment to patients and setting them up for success. It's also going to create a lot of resentment in your relationships when you get into partnerships, and this is one of the systemic issues with a lot of your DSOs and a lot of your DPOs. Because as a partner, part of your income is a distribution of profit. Well, depending on what your clinical philosophy is, you're contributing to the cash flow of that organization at varying levels. So if I'm doing implants, endo, ortho, and third molars, and I'm contributing $1.5 million of production, and I have a partner who owns 50%, who only does crown and bridge, and we're in a saturated market because there's only so much crown and bridge and 1,000 patients, and let's say I also lie more on the reactive side of the scale, and I'm only producing $500,000 of dentistry, and we're working the same number of days, you might see a problem with this? Yes, no? That's a real problem, okay? So that's one of the things that we absolutely want to help our clients avoid those types of mistakes, okay? I want you to date insurance, but I don't want you to marry insurance, okay? Insurance is a tool. It's a resource that's available to you. If you go to a marketing company and you say, hey, I need 50 new patients a month, can you help me out? They say, sure, that's gonna be $5,000. Okay, great, that sounds like a good deal. So I'm gonna take that deal and I sign a contract with them for 12 months and I pay them $5,000 a month. What happens if you don't get 50 new patients a month? Do you still pay them $5,000? Of course you do. All the risk is on you. With an insurance company, it's the exact opposite. It's a risk reversal. Now, let me be very clear about this. I am not advocating for insurance. I believe every one of you guys should be fee for service by the end of your career. 100%. And if you can get there sooner, kudos to you, okay? But insurance is a tool. And I find a lot of disgruntled dentists on Facebook groups and in discussion forums and all this kind of stuff griping and complaining about insurance participation. You chose to go and network with them. It's a tool. That's all it is. What the insurance company says is say, I don't like that deal that you have with that marketing company. So what I'm gonna do is you're not gonna pay me a dime unless I send you patients. And if I do, you're gonna knock off 30 or 40% of your fee. Does that sound like a deal? That costs you anything. There's no risk. But it costs a lot if I send you patients. It's simply a tool. It's a mechanism. It's one of the ways to make treatment affordable. And what studies show, patients only want 3 things from you all. They want treatment to be affordable. And by the way, 87% of respondents in the most recent study that I've seen view affordability as assignment of benefit. You accept assignment of benefit from my insurance plan, not you are in network with my insurance plan. You're gonna have a difficult time convincing your team of that fact. I had this conversation with a practice in Knoxville today, but that's the truth. As long as you accept assignment of benefit, you are viewed in 87% of the population's mind as affordable care, okay? The other one is convenience. Now, one of the things that I talk to groups a lot about is, private practice really hangs its hat on quality care. Quality care, quality care, quality care. Private equity funded DSOs tend to hang their hat more on convenience. We have all the specialties under one roof. We operate 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, okay? In my opinion, my humble, honest, personal opinion, I hope not to offend anybody in this statement, but I tend to think that controversial comments tend to resonate with people, and I think you'll agree with my statement. I think quality care is irrelevant if people don't have access to it. So in my opinion, your standard of care is an elegant balance of the quality of clinical care that you provide and people's ability to access it. It's also my opinion that private practice does not manage access to care very well. The practice that I was in today, we had this conversation for 3 hours. He's running 3 calls of hygiene, and if you reappoint a recare patient today, they're 8 months out. Those patients are gonna go somewhere else before they come back. If a new patient calls his practice today, it's February before they can get in. That's a problem. That's an access to care problem. And because private practice historically manages capacity poorly, we've created the opportunity, we've created the need for insurance companies and private equity funded DSOs. So if we created the opportunity for private equity funded DSOs and insurance companies to penetrate this industry, then you also hold the cards to eliminate the need for them. But you have to take control of your industry. You have to be more entrepreneurial. Okay? So, really quick on this slide, what this is describing is one scale is the proactive reactive scale that I described earlier. The other scale is based on your clinical suite, how comprehensive you are. If you're only Crown and Bridge, like I mentioned earlier, there's only so much Crown and Bridge in 1,000 patients. You're only going to be so productive. But if you offer Crown and Bridge and you do implants and endo and third molars and sleep and IV sedation, you're a lot more productive than the dentist that only does Crown and Bridge. Now, some of you only want to do Crown and Bridge, and you're going to work your butt off for the next 30 years, or maybe not working harder than anybody else, but you're going to make it a very successful 20, 30-year career only doing Crown and Bridge. And what I would tell you is that in order for that to happen, that's probably only going to happen in a market where the saturation is very low, where there's not a lot of competition, in your more rural markets. When you get into your more metro areas, the competition is very steep. The saturation is, you know, a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,800. If you're in a market where it's like 1 in 4,500, 1 in 5,000, you're probably going to do just fine and have a limited skill set. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Some of you have no interest in placing implants, and that's totally fine. But where you're located and what your financial strategy is with respect to insurance plans and your business model is dependent upon this, not the other way around. This dictates where you're located. Successfully, this dictates what your insurance strategy is. Okay? So if you tend to lean more towards the reactive side, or you tend to lean more towards the proactive side, if you only want to do Crown and Bridge, or if you want to do Crown and Bridge, implants, endo, and ortho, then your financial model, your financial strategy is going to reflect that. If I'm a dentist who's very proactive and I've got a crown to filling ratio of 4, 5, 6 to 1, and I do implants, endo, ortho, and third molars, I'm probably going to be able to produce $1.5, $1.7 million and take home $500,000 to $700,000 on 1,000 patients. But if I only do Crown and Bridge, even if I'm on the proactive side, if I only do Crown and Bridge, then I might need 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 active patients to take home the same kind of money that that guy's taking. Y'all follow what I'm saying? Okay? So it's not a right or wrong or a good or a bad. It's not wrong if you lean right or left, and it's not good or bad if you lean right or left, and it's not right or wrong if you have an advanced skill set or a limited skill set. But you need to decide what you want that to look like, and you need to build your business around that. Not have a business and then try to force yourself into what that business needs you to be. Because that's going to be very stressful, and I wouldn't advise that for anybody. Okay? Now, when it comes to your insurance strategy and your financial strategy, like I mentioned, I believe all of you should be fee-for-service by the end of your career. And there's a lot of different approaches that you can take here to help optimize demand. But based on my comment earlier, that private practice historically has done a poor job managing access to care. This is where that takes place. To Seth's point, if he's still in here, if you get a building from Seth and he negotiates the lease for you, you have 12 operatories and you're only using 5, you better not be dropping insurance plans. Because your number one objective, if you have unused operatories, is to fill those operatories up. They're costing you money whether you're using them or not, so you might as well put butts in the seat. Now, if you have 9 operatories and you need 12, if you have 7 operatories and you can't get a new patient in your schedule for 2 months and you can't get recare patients back in, that is a fantastic time for you to begin eliminating insurance participation. And this is an organic process. This happens organically over time, predictably. I've got a number of practices right now. We are actively dropping insurance plans, and some of them we're actively dropping multiple plans at a time. The position that you ultimately want to be in over time is right here, if you can get there. About 80% of the practices in the country, 75 to 80% of the practices in the country are PPO driven. About 15 to 20%, give or take, depending on who you ask, are Medicaid practices, and about 2 to 3%. Less than 5% are cash practices, and most of the cash practices are specialty practices. So what I mean by cash practices, they don't accept assignment of benefit. You come into my practice, you pay my full fee on the date of service, you file your own insurance. I don't deal with it, which also means I don't have to employ a staff to deal with insurance. A fee-for-service practice, a lot of people think that a fee-for-service practice's overhead is less than a PPO-driven practice because they don't have to have all the people that worries about insurance. They do all the same things. They still file the insurance claim. They still chase the insurance claim down. They still collect from the insurance claim. They still chase the patient down. They have the same staff as a PPO-driven practice, but they get paid more for their services if they're out of network than they do if they're in network. Does that make sense? So over time, what we want to do is provide a very positive patient experience, provide convenience and affordability and comfort, all the things that patients want. And as our practice grows and as we begin to reach certain capacity constraints, then we strategically begin to eliminate insurance plans and reduce insurance participation. And then ultimately, when we get like my friend Brad, who we dropped Delta in his practice about 2 years ago, and it did not have the effect that we hoped it would. He was trying to slow down, and he actually has more patients now than he had when he was in network with Delta. And he's just one guy, and he's in the heart of Knoxville. Okay, but now we're in a position that says he still has too much volume, he still has capacity constraints. So now what options does he have? Well, now he can stop accepting assignment of benefit and become a true cash practice. Does this make sense?
Can you explain what assignment of benefit is?
Yep, assignment of benefit means you come into my practice, I do a crown, we file your insurance claim, and Christine is going to walk through this whole process for you guys. We file the insurance claim pays us because the assignment of benefit is the practice, not the patient. So the claim gets paid to me, and then I realize there's a balance, and then I have to get paid by you. Okay, if the assignment of benefit is to the patient, then you're going to pay my full fee on the date of service. And I might still file your insurance claim, but the insurance company is going to reimburse you because I paid it full. Does this make sense? Okay. Now, it is incredibly, incredibly expensive to have a mismanaged financial department. In fact, there are 5 hidden costs in your financial engine, okay? One of them is lost interest income. If you're doing in-house financing or you file the insurance claim for the patient, you didn't charge the patient their portion on the date of service, and you file their insurance claim, you wait for the insurance claim to pay, and then you try to get paid by the patient, you just extended them an interest-free loan. You just became a bank. Let me ask you a question. Y'all do loans interest-free? I don't think so. Neither should you. So if you're carrying balances for patients, you should be charging 1.5% per month or 18% per year. That's going to incentivize them to pay you sooner, rather than letting that drag out for 30, 60, 90, 120 days and ultimately wind up having to go to small claims court or send them to collections, which nobody wants to do. Right? I tend to like to incentivize behavior rather than penalize behavior. I would rather incentivize you to do the right thing than penalize you if you do the wrong thing. I tend to find people receive that a little bit more favorably. Okay, so lost interest income is one of the expenses. Depreciation expense. Put this in your notes if you have anything to write on. If you don't, I put it in your phone. This principle applies across the board. For every day a patient balance ages, it depreciates in value 0.5%, which means by the time 90 days passes, it's worth half of what it was on the date of service. For every day an insurance claim ages, it depreciates in value 0.5%. For every day a treatment plan ages, it depreciates in value 0.5%. So there are certain systems and mechanisms like enrollment and handling objections and reactivation that help optimize the completion of treatment so that it doesn't depreciate value. Another hidden cost. Opportunity cost. You know what the average cost of, I don't know if you know any practices that are sending statements, like paper statements in the mail, but when you add up the overhead, the rent, the utilities, the computer, the paper, the ink, the stamp, the envelope, you know what the estimated cost of one paper statement is? $12. $12. The average practice has 300 accounts in their AR. Anybody know what 300 times 12 is? $3,600 a month. It costs to mail paper statements. So if you have a clearinghouse that's doing that for you, yeah, that saves you money, but it's still costing you a lot of money that it shouldn't cost you at all. Rather than sending a paper statement, why not send a text with a link that says click here and pay me? Now you're just incurring a merchant fee of like 2%, 3% of $1,000, that's $220. That's a lot less expensive than paper statements. But imagine that you didn't lose the interest income. Imagine that you didn't lose the depreciation expense. Imagine that you didn't lose the cost of sending statements and the interest expense. What could you have done with the savings? You could have reinvested the savings in your practice and buying a CBCT or a 3D printer or a CEREC machine or an implant course. And if you could have invested in those things, what would that have done for the growth of your practice? You see where I'm going with this? Incredibly, incredibly important. I'm going to leave you with three points here, and then I'm going to let Christina take over. The three things that I would share with you is A, invest in your clinical skill set heavily and do it now. That's going to drive your career for the next 20 or 30 years. Be willing to sacrifice now for what it means for your future. A dentist that's coming out of dental school with a GPR or AEGD that's placing implants and has some experience, you are a lot more attractive to a prospective practice that's looking for an associate than just Crown and Bridge. Because at the end of the day, it is a business that we're trying to run, and productivity does matter. Okay? The second thing that I would tell you is learn how to lead. I cannot stress that one enough. That one variable right there is going to plague your entire career if you don't invest time and energy in learning how to lead now, learning how to lead and learning how to communicate effectively and holding people accountable. Your team is one of the most valuable resources that you have. It is the largest expense on your P&L or your largest cost, depending on the people that you have on the bus. All the right people can have the best systems. All the wrong people can have the best systems. They're not going anywhere. But all the right people can have no systems at all, and you're still going to make progress. And the last thing that I would tell you is this. If I don't lose it. No, I didn't lose it. Okay? Surround yourself with the right people. The right people. The right colleagues. This peer-to-peer collaboration is going to be incredibly important for your career. Incredibly important. Build effective relationships now and sustain those relationships through the balance of your career, because you're going to be able to learn from one another's mistakes. The only thing better than learning from your own mistake is learning from someone else's. So all y'all go out and mess up, fail fast, fail forward, and then learn from one another. And then build your executive team. A banking partner, a coach, if we're fortunate enough to have that relationship with you, a real estate partner, an attorney, brokers. That's your board of directors. You're the CEO. That's your board of directors, and their job is to provide you with the resources and the information you need to make effective executive decisions. Yes, ma'am.
As far as the interest that becoming the bank and lending into your patients, is that an active part of your collection plan, or is that a last resort?
I love that policy. That's written right there into your financial policy, which Christina will talk about. And all it does is it incentivizes patients. So, for example, if you're trying to collect money from a patient, the patient says, "Oh, I just can't afford it right now." What's your name?
Mercedes.
Mercedes. Nice. If you call me and you say, "I just can't afford it right now," and I say, "Mercedes, I'm so glad that you said that. That's actually the reason I'm calling." As you know, we do have 1.5% interest that accrues each month on balances that are aging. So the longer it takes to get this balance cleared, it's actually becoming more expensive. So because it's important to you to keep the costs down, the best way for us to do that is get that balance taken care of now. Make sense? That's the whole reason that policy is there.
Is it ever a concern as far as starting a practice and maybe being a little tighter on money of becoming the bank and having to wait for that money to come in?
I would never recommend you implement that policy if you do not have a sound financial engine. If you don't know how to manage money, don't make the money part of your practice more complicated, right? If you have that can be an income center in your practice, not a substantial one, but it can be an income center. But if you have very poorly managed AR, or you've got a lot of turnover in the front desk and you're having a hard time really getting a grasp on that part of the practice, that's not the time to really do that. You can, but it just adds an additional variable to manage. And I would rather like keep it simple until we have a really good grasp on it, and then once we have a really good grasp on it, really good systems in place, that's a fantastic tool. Thanks your question. Okay, thank you guys, I appreciate y'all having me.
Hi, I'm Christina Johnson, and I'm with Fortune Management as well. I'm local here to Kentucky. So I live in Louisville, and I'm driving up and down these highways pretty much every day in dental practices that we work with. I am gonna dig into, John talked about a lot of the high-level ideas and the strategy and approach. I'm going to dig into the details, and hopefully this answers your question as well, Mercedes, and gets into how can we avoid even having balances in AR in the first place. It is so funny to me that when we go to the grocery store, we expect to pay for our groceries when we get them and before we leave the grocery store and take them home. But when we go get healthcare, dentistry included, a lot of times people expect that they can go get their treatment and they can walk out without paying. So the number one thing that we recommend any practice do is you're gonna collect payment for treatment up front. So if you're working with insurance, you're estimating that amount and you're collecting it before the patient ever goes into the room. So if you've collected it up front, it can't become a balance that you have to go collect. It's something that you've already taken care of. So if you take care of it on the front end, then you don't have to go recover it on the back end. And so it kind of gets you out of that really tough place of, okay, the patient came in, they got treatment, now we have to bill them, there's this whole 30-day cycle that's happening, we're trying to get money, but we could have just gotten it the day they came in for treatment. In the same way that we pay for our groceries, we need to shift how patients think about paying for treatment. A lot of our practices are very, very successful at this, and it creates a world of difference for their AR pretty quickly. You can start seeing that turnaround within 30 days of implementing an approach like this. And the very next conversation we have with them after they implement is, oh my goodness, our estimate was off. And we then, had to give them a credit, or we had to write them a check because they paid us too much. Or maybe we didn't collect enough and we're still chasing some AR. So the next part of this is when you are estimating that payment that you're taking before they ever walk into a treatment room, before they walk into the operatory at check-in, you're accepting that payment, you want to overestimate that at 15 to 20%. And it's going to do a couple of things. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen an insurance company, when we get estimates, it looks like they're going to pay $1,000, and then a procedure happens and they actually pay $800. It happens a lot where we think they're going to pay a certain amount, or in the middle of a procedure, especially a more complicated procedure, you might be changing treatment in the chair or realize you have to do something additional you weren't planning for. That a lot of times was not included in that initial amount unless you're adding on that 15 to 20% increase. And what we like to do, we add that on, and then if it comes out where we actually didn't need it, it's a credit on that patient's account. That then opens the door for a conversation when we're trying to get them to go on to the next treatment, or if we're trying to get them to come in for re-care. So sometimes patients will have a balance with us, and when we're calling to get them in, we're doing treatment reactivation, maybe they need more treatment, and they're hesitant to come in, we can say, oh, you actually have a $150 balance, that's gonna help offset that for you. It's a really good way to also continue that relationship with patients. Also, a lot of our practices, if it's over a certain amount, they will send a check. We're not going to just hold on to $1,000 or something like that. We hold on to small amounts as a credit for our patient. Does that make sense? So, I cannot tell you how many practices I walk into and they so proudly talk about their admin day. Maybe the office is closed on Fridays or Mondays, and the whole team still comes in and they have an admin day. They file their insurance claims, they clean up their systems, they might clean their rooms, and they're so proud to tell us about this. But remember that 1% depreciation per day John was talking about? Think about that also from this perspective. We want to see our claims filed with the insurance the day of treatment. We don't want to wait a week to file them. We don't want to have an admin day. I was in a practice earlier this week where I found out that they still had some claims from last month that they had not sent through yet because of all these really good reasons. It can get really hectic, it can get really busy. It's why it's really important that you're a great leader and you hire the right people for the right role. If you have the right insurance coordinator who's empowered to do their job, and you keep the hustle and bustle and the craziness and chaos that can sometimes take over the office out of their sphere, then you're gonna be able to file your claims with the insurance same day. This is gonna mean that you get your payment from them more quickly. A lot of times you're gonna get that payment and realize a patient still owes you a little bit of money. It also expedites the process of requesting that money from the patient. So the name of the game here is doing small things to incrementally speed up how fast you're able to get paid. The ideal is you would always be paid before treatment or before service for every patient. That's not always possible. So trying to get it, doing every little thing you can do to get it as close as possible to the day of treatment. So we're gonna file those insurance claims same day. This is really interesting. I was in a practice yesterday with one of our clients, and I was sitting down with the insurance coordinator. They just dropped an insurance, and so it's creating some additional work for her. AR had gotten really backed up, and so their 90+ day AR was a little deeper, and she was really stressed out. They had several people at the front desk who had been sick over the last couple of months, and then who had deaths in the family, so she had constantly been working the front desk instead of working her desk. And so I sat down and I was like, how can I help you? And she said, I have no idea what to do first. I have hundreds of claims that I need to process with insurance companies. I have a lot of statements that I need to send to patients, and I don't even know where to start. I was like, I know where to start. We call it the 1 to 31 file, and you see an accordion file here. Some people will still use a tangible paper file. What I set up with our client yesterday was files in folders on her computer. It was not a paper file, but it works whether you want to do it in a computer file or a paper file. And anyone want to guess 1 through 31? What's the significance of that? There's 31 days in the longest month. And so what we're trying to do, a patient comes in and they get treatment. They're with United. We know when we file a claim with United, it typically takes 10 days to get payment. So I'm gonna take that patient, that piece of paper that's representing that claim, and I'm gonna put it in the 10 file. And I don't have to think about it again. Well, if it's the 1st, if it's the 20th, I might put it in the 30 file. So you put it 10 days out from where you are, and you don't have to think about it again or touch it again until that day. It kind of keeps track of itself as long as you're putting things where they belong. And so if you talk to a patient and they say, okay, I don't get paid for 2 more weeks, I can pay you in 2 weeks. Okay, what's 14 days from today? And you drop that in that file. It is a way to keep almost a mindless record of what you need to be doing next from a claims perspective. It's incredibly simple, but it's incredibly powerful, because walking into our office today was not the first time that I heard an insurance coordinator say, I have no idea where to start. I have no idea what to do next. it is a gnarly, complicated thing that they're often unraveling, and having simplicity in that chaos is like a godsend. So we swear by a 1 to 31 file as a way to simplify life for our insurance coordinators.